Welcome to Rollwise, the weekly podcast that explores all things tabletop RPGs. I'm Mike, one of your hosts, and I'm joined by my fellow RPG enthusiasts.
I'm Brent.
Hi, I'm Jeff.
So settle in and let's kick off this week's show. So this week we're going to discuss a few topics. First of all, we're going to talk about the recent D&D Creator Summit because as a non-news show that's talking about reactionary content, we are going to react to what creators had to say about Wizards of the Coast and their attempt to create some community outreach. We're also going to talk about Black Flag and the design diaries. We are a little bit late to this one as it came out a couple weeks ago, but at the same token, it was a good thing to read. And we'll also talk about what we perceive our thoughts about where Black Flag's core fantasy role playing game is going to land. And then I'm going to provide a quick review of Golden Sky Stories. Not necessarily a new RPG, but over the week, I did take a look at it on the request of a friend. And so I'll give my thoughts. So, you guys ready to kick it?
We are ready.
All
Ready.
right. So, first of all, the D&D Creator Summit. For those of you that are not aware, the D&D team actually got themselves a bunch of influencers, third-party publishers, and a bunch of people all in their Washington headquarters, and they decided that they were going to have what the community thought was a community outreach summit. Basically, get people that were, I mean, could you consider influencers and creators like heads of the community? Um, I
Sure.
think so. I mean,
Yeah, they're definitely perceived as heads of the community. I think the people that they invited.
yeah. So they got a bunch of people in a room, and it's my understanding they invited 50 in person, and they had 150 that were going to be potentially attending virtually. Not every seat was able to be filled. Some people weren't able to make it, so it was less in person, less virtually. But that does not matter because there was still enough action to possibly have gotten them on World Star Hip Hop. So why don't we start with the beginning and we go just from I guess, the expectations. So it seems like the creators kind of thought that this was Wizards of the Coast kind of extending an olive branch to basically say, hey, you know what? These last few months we kind of fucked up and we want to invite you guys so we can have a candid conversation about the future of D&D. And that doesn't seem to be exactly how it presented. What did you guys hear on the street?
Well, I think that's what the content creators thought. I don't think that was ever. It doesn't sound like that was ever Wizards' idea of what the conference was about. It sounds like it was more of a press junket for um, for Wizards. It seems like they had stuff that they wanted to shield for the people that are heads of the community, and it sounds like that got derailed a little bit when the content creators had other opinions that they wanted to express.
Hmm.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I think a lot of people. Sorry, Mike.
no,
I
go
think a
ahead.
lot of people, by calling it a summit, I think that set expectations in people's minds that there were going to be discussions, that there were going to be questions that could be asked and answers that could be received. And, I don't think anybody thought they were going to get all of the answers. But a lot of the questions that I heard that Wizards was not prepared to answer, such as, is there going to be a cost for the virtual tabletop? What are the what are the minimum system requirements? Can I stream the virtual tabletop because that's my channel? I stream live plays.
Mhm.
Um, they didn't seem prepared to answer that, and it felt more like no, we have a script. We're going to regurgitate it to you. You're going to listen. You're going to thank us, and we're all going to go our separate ways. And I just don't think that's how it was. I don't think that's how it was taken. Whether it was sold that way or not, I don't know. I didn't get invited.
Yeah.
But, there was a disconnect, and I think it created room for creators to go, "Well, if we can't learn what you told us we're coming here about, we're gonna bring up, OGL stuff."
Mhm. Yeah, and that's kind of what I had heard as well. Is that there seemed to be as people started realizing it was called a press event. I mean, and people have been invited to these, and I'm sure that they've seen it in many industries. Where somebody has a new game coming out, and they invite all the influencers to try the game out and basically get ready for the hype that's supposed to surround it. And everyone goes for a mysterious weekend at this cool hotel for whatever it is. But it quickly devolved into something very different. And I think there was a lot of anger, and I think that the creators did this kind of as professionally as you could imagine for people that had really spent the last few months on various sides of the spit roast, kind of getting beat up by their fans, beat up by other people's fans for having
Mhm.
different takes than their favorite creators and content creators and stuff like that. And so it was interesting that they kind of got people in the room and they didn't have a plan to at least talk about the elephant. I wonder if
Well,
they thought that Kyle and his rehabilitation tour had done enough to already address those previous grievances that they felt that they could jump right into the virtual tabletop, the future of oneD&D, and all that stuff.
I think it's a just kind of a perception of it doesn't matter anymore. Like it's been a couple weeks. They're probably over it. But I mean, there's a lot of emotional investment. Not only are they getting beaten up by fans and everybody else, but like there's also a strong possibility like some of them's livelihood could be removed. And
Hmm.
so to be in a room full of those people and not expect that to come up seems very short-sighted to me.
Yeah.
I mean, let alone the fact that some of the stuff that they like the actual business stuff that they talked about also seemed weirdly short-sighted, like to just point virtual tabletop and just them being like, oh, you guys might want to stream this content because they're like, I guess the question came up, is there this is really graphic intensive and really nice, is there a less system intensive one? And they're like, oh well, we never thought of that. It's like,
Hmm.
how have you never thought of that when like the 50 people that are here are potentially people that play D&D online?
Hmm.
So like weird stuff, like just weird out of touch stuff, I guess is what I guess.
S-
It's one of those
Some of
things
it,
that just seems out of touch.
some of it was out of touch. I did hear a couple of examples. One specific to Bluetooth dice, which I'm not surprised to hear. Maybe I'm out of touch. I didn't know those existed. In theory, yes. In physical form, no. But apparently, somebody asked about Bluetooth dice, and the developers of the VTT said, "Hey, if you want, Bluetooth dice to connect to the table, we can do that." And so, maybe some of the answers were a little more positive, but not having some of the specs or like, I get it's still early. It's not like it's launching in a
Hmm.
month. You don't have all of the answers, but to not expect these people want to deliver content to their audiences.
Hmm.
They want to come back and not just regurgitate. Like if all you want them to do is regurgitate your marketing and press information,
Hmm.
put it out yourself.
Right.
Yeah. Well, and it's interesting because some of the larger channels that I follow, I haven't necessarily seen them put out videos about the Creator Summit just yet. And I don't know if they're editing stuff together or putting it together as best they could, but it seemed like there were some folks that jumped right on the bandwagon and were like, okay, this is the inside scoop by a person that was there. Regrettably, that doesn't include this channel. So we are getting this all secondhand and we're just kind of reacting to what people had said, but that's okay. And then but like I said, it was kind of interesting to see the absence of some of those larger creators, their reactions, their information there, but it seemed like they still voiced some very serious questions at the conference. So I think that kind of moving to the virtual tabletop, one of the things I did see on one article that was published was that somebody had mentioned that there were four goals of the VTT that they were trying to do, and that the four goals were fun, convenience, authenticity, and immersion. So basically translating the joy of playing D&D into the virtual tabletop. Convenience, reducing barriers to learn, play, prep, and DM. Authenticity, recognize and reinforce the core of D&D. And immersion, feel connected to the world and people playing. Now, I mean, is it? Do you think that do you think that those are the goals that will help them succeed? And do you think that that's possible with a virtual tabletop, or do you think that may be an aspiration and then we end up with something like Roll 20? Because I don't feel like Roll 20 would hit those marks myself.
I definitely feel like it's aspirational. I don't know if it's going to do those things as well as they hope to.
Hmm.
The one thing that I did like that I did hear one content creator say though is that they did say when they said, "Well, people are going to want to stream this. Like, can we run OBS and stuff with it?" And they're like, "We don't know." One of the things that they did say is, "Oh, well, we want you guys. That's what we want you guys to tell us. Is we want you guys to give us that feedback." And like, that's nice. Like, that's
Hmm.
cool. But like, how did no one think of that? How did no one think of that beforehand? I guess is my thing. Like, how that just seems short sighted. But like as far as the tabletop, I don't know if they can. I don't know if they'll hit all those goals because especially if it's something where, yeah, I just don't know. It's interesting that those are their goals, but I don't. I would say Roll 20. Yeah, I would agree. Roll 20 doesn't necessarily hit all those.
Mhm.
And then I don't know, in my opinion, and this is a little bit slanted because I miss physical games and I like
Mhm.
theater of the mind stuff. So for me, I don't know if I feel like any virtual tabletop will really help with that, but
Yeah.
that's more my opinion.
Well, just so people know, one of the articles that gave a lot of good information was from Daniel H. Kwan and his Substack. So if you want to read additional details, I think we should probably mention to anybody listening that there are a ton of people that have reported out on the individual like bullet points of what was happening there. We're more talking about in general sense and all those kind of things. I think that one thing that Daniel had on his post was that the VTT is currently in the pre-alpha state and is presently focused on playing, not creating. This and then the brief roadmap that they presented was in 2023. They would be focusing on supporting core mechanics, implementing intuitive player UI and play assets, DM controls, and increasing testing feedback. 2024, they'll shift to character and miniature creation, encounter and world building, a remixable content lighter and wider play testing. And in 2025, they plan on some form of release, allowing people to use the same tools, share creations, and engage in a wider community feedback loop. I guess for me, it doesn't really tell me when they would expect the BTT to be released then. Like, I don't like as a person who is, a person who likes to play D&D on the regular, or at least I did on the regular. Now we've been playing a lot of different games, but does that mean I should expect the VTT in 2025 after the PHB and everything like that are released? Like,
I I think we're gonna have to wait. I Starfield comes to mind. It's a game I've been looking forward to for 3 years. Finally got a
only,
release date. I'm super happy that it's coming out because some games never seem to make it. But I mean, it's built on the Unreal 5 engine, so that it is. I mean, this is a lot closer to a video. It's not a video game. I understand that, but at its base, there's a lot of similarities to a video game. So a lot of the development may take some time,
yeah,
and I hope that they don't release it super buggy. I hope that they
hmm,
test it a lot. That there's a lot of iterative cycles of testing with people who can stress it a little bit and
yeah,
find out. It doesn't do
Mm,
this, it doesn't do that, and give them the good feedback.
My guess is it'll be released in stages and it'll be beta and you'll have part of it. And then that'll go live and you'll have that part of it. And then there'll be a beta for the second part. And so I think that's probably what you'll see realistically, because ideally they're going to try and use the community to bug hunt, I assume.
yeah. But I think the tough part about a VTT is that it's like, you know, if you want immersion, like how much immersion can you get if you're only testing like the rules, right? Like you basically get like a one of those glass beads. You put that on there, and that's your representation of your avatar in the screen. You know what I'm saying?
Well,
Like it is curious to me, like how you test it in phases like that. Especially since I'm not a developer or anything along those lines, but working with people, you know, on projects that have to be developed through IT and all that kind of thing. I would hate for them to do like some sort of early access thing and get people sour on it just because it was released too early, or they were given the expectation that it would be a much more complete product than it is.
Oh, I don't think there's any way you're going to avoid that though. I would bet money
Mhm.
that that's how they're going to release it, with the idea of immersion being an end goal, not a
Yeah.
processing goal. So,
Mhm.
and they may like release different expectations to everybody and stuff like that this isn't complete and everything like that. But I
Mhm.
mean, look at the D&D game. That's what D&D game is out and it's been in beta forever. Which one is that?
Baldur's Gate 3.
Yeah, I think it's going to have a similar release. My guess is it's going to have a similar release to that. This is
Well,
the
yeah.
beta. Keep
Yeah.
that's
testing it.
a
You can only join the game on the VTT if you all want to play Circle of the Moon Druids
Yeah, exactly. We got
and
to get that.
Bardlings for some reason.
We got to get that druid shit worked out before we can roll anything else out to everybody.
I mean, those are some really big goals, and Brent hit it on the head. I think they're aspirational. I don't think there's
Mhm.
any way the first release of the product is going to get us there. but I at least hope that it feels like it is.
Mhm.
I and I hate to, bring generations up to this, but the idea of 5 of us sitting at a table and all of us staring at our laptops seems the antithesis of what I remember, in-person gaming sessions being, and I think some of that is because I didn't grow up with a screen in my hand. I use screens a lot now, but I didn't
Mhm.
I didn't grow up with it. And I think that there are people that will find that to be supremely immersive.
Mhm.
That experience of being able to visualize, actually visualize the same thing that everybody sees the same thing. Everybody understands where everybody's positioned.
Yeah.
Um, I
So
think for some people it's going to be great, but
so one thing that I would bring up that I think is interesting, and I just thought of this, is like, what about conventions? Like conventions are like, you're going to see D&D disappear from conventions because not everybody's going to have laptops at conventions.
I don't think the convention's going to have the bandwidth to support like
Yeah.
depending on how much. I mean, things are better, but, like, if you go to a sporting event or a huge concert, like, it is poop-tastic to do anything other than maybe text, and those texts take a long time to send and receive.
Hmm.
Even even at events where they bring in dedicated, like, additional mobile cell towers, we
Mhm.
still don't have bandwidth fully fixed. It's better than it was 10 years ago. It's better than it was 5 years ago. 5 years from now, it's gonna be better. But I still don't know that at a convention, let's say Gen Con, if you
Mhm.
have 600 people trying to stream, the VT, I don't know if that's gonna work in one location. Maybe it will. I hope
Yeah.
they work it out, but
Yeah, it's just a thought that like, it'll be interesting because like it, it's hard for me to imagine either. It actually reminds me of a D&D ad campaign that was happening. I think when it was 3.5 came out,
Mhm.
and the ad campaign was something like, if you want to play an elf, at least do it at a table with your friends or something like that. And it had full page layout and comic books because they were combating the MMO market, like they were
Mm.
combating
right.
you playing Warcraft
Yeah.
over D&D. And so that was like the marketing campaign. It is weird to me to remember that marketing campaign and now to see like the exact opposite of that.
Well, it's 20 years
I
later.
know it's still
Well,
weird to me
But
though.
I have a question. I have one question that I
sure.
want both of you to answer. Are there people that are going to learn to play D&D and get exposed to it with a virtual tabletop? And then is their mind just going to explode if they're asked to play without the VTT? Maybe not without the computer keeping track of the character stuff, but
I
is it going to be hard for them to do a
I think so.
I I think I have very, as a person who has devolved over the course of my life to the current thing that you see today, I think that, as beasts of convenience, if you don't use a certain muscle, in this case your imagination, to kind of keep track of different things or create fantastical worlds. And a case in point is I used to read physical books a lot, but I've read so many comic books. I have not been able to digitally detoxify myself. A physical book is hard for me to read because I just read so much media on my phone and I read a lot of comic books. So when I try to read a book, my brain just kind of gets sluggish. However, if I listen to an audiobook, I'm usually more engaged because I can still like keep up with the story and everything like that. But I feel like it's going to be the same thing with a VTT is that if that's how you started playing D&D and then you go out and camp somewhere and somebody's like, hey, want to continue the adventure, they're going to be like, oh, yeah, sure, but I just can't manage all this without my digital goods, like.
And if you get dependent on the VTT and somebody's like, "Hey, we want to try a different game. We want to play Monster of the Week, which
Mhm.
is a Powered by Apocalypse game." Oh, there's no virtual tabletop.
Yeah,
What do I do?
yeah. And I
It's
don't
gonna
want to
be
be
hard.
dismissive of people's ability to adapt and create
no, 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 not
stuff.
No,
not
but
at all.
it'll be harder. I mean, it's
Yeah.
we've talked about this before. Like the transition
Mhm.
from somebody who only plays video games to somebody who plays a tabletop
Mhm.
RPG. There's definitely a learning curve.
Yeah.
And I think that's what you'll run into. And
Well,
we'll also have the added complication of not being able to know which fifth edition book we're talking about.
well, well,
Whether we're
We'll talk about that in
So
a second, though.
okay.
But I did want to point out one thing that I was able to find in that article is that so the person who was the VTT game director was Kale Stutzman, and they had basically said that and this is what always boggles my mind about the disconnect between the marketing team and the developers is that they had mentioned that the demo they showed at the D&D Direct video that was presented was not the primary way they envisioned folks to use the VTT. So I always love when there's that like we're going to market this in a way that everyone's going to be sitting around the table with their laptops, open and doing all this stuff. And ooh, it's so cool. I moved my person to the bar and all that stuff. And then the game director is like, well, I mean, you could do that, but that's not really how we envision people playing it. It just made for a shittier video to show people at their house sitting eating Cheetos playing it on the VTT, I guess.
Sure. No, that I mean that makes sense.
Well,
I
yeah,
we're making a lot of assumptions, and not
Mhm.
all of them are right.
and it makes more sense that you would use the VTT remote to play remotely and not in
Mhm.
person, in my opinion. Like that makes sense. Um,
Yeah.
because or I think I commented on it before that it seemed weird to me that they were using the virtual tabletop all around the same table. But you know,
Mhm.
look at your friends. It's okay.
Yeah. Whoa, whoa, whoa. I can only look at you. In order to be fully immersed, I have to only see your character through this. No more dressing up. Screw that. You've got to put your little mini or fig here.
Eh,
Um,
yeah. It feels like we drugged the VTT through
enough mud.
enough mud.
Okay. Because I mean, the worst part is it does look cool, but if your computer can't run it, then who gives a fuck, right? So
That these are just old gamer opinions. That's what I'm gonna say about that.
old gamer opinions. I'm young. Yeah, he says. So I guess let's
Me
segue
too.
that. Let's segue that into the next part. The next part was actually kind of interesting. Was talking about basically the one D&D and how it, as a play test, turned into this very strange. Like I'm not even really sure I understand the like sequence of events that basically led to we've got a huge announcement. We're going to do one D&D. It's going to be the future of Dungeons and Dragons. It's going to be the perfect addition to I mean the end result of the Creator Summit was like, "Oh yeah, we're just doing 5th edition and we're just smashing all these rules together in hopes that it makes a coherent game. You want a 2014 Ranger playing with a 2024 Ranger? Done." Like, what?
Yeah, like I said, are we talking about the 2014 fifth edition, or are we talking about the 2024 fifth
Well,
edition?
I mean,
Mhm.
hopefully a group is going to revise that, and the older books are going to be out of print. The material won't be available online. They're essentially revising the rules, right? Is my understanding. So they're making changes to the existing rules. Um,
Did
I think most groups are going to play one or the other, probably not a mix.
did they say that they weren't going to be online? Because it was my understanding that it sounded like everything was still going to be out there.
Yeah,
It's
that
going to be available like on the VTT as a legacy thing, but like any of the new stuff, anybody that picks it up new is just going to know the new stuff. Do you know what I mean?
yeah. And so, I mean, what's interesting is that you're going to have 2014 fifth edition and then 2024 fifth edition. And I think the VTT will probably be able to manage that a little bit better. But I mean, but will one D&D or D&D Beyond manage it better? I mean, you can still, and truthfully, they are at least, keeping with their promise that the adventures and everything like that are going to be fairly compatible. I think there might be some, converter type stuff that you have to do, like converting some monsters and all those things. But um, backwards compatibility to basically say that everything is just going to be fifth edition going forward, but kind of revised and slightly errated, is not what I anticipated the one D&D play test and announcement to yield.
So the real question is, can you play your 2014 fifth edition paladin that can smite every round?
It's up to your GM, like anything.
I guess. I mean, rules is written, or at least as explained by Jeremy Crawford, is that yeah, you would be able to play your 2014 Paladin if you didn't like the new Paladin rules, which I mean, since the entire purpose of the new rules was to balance and correct and improve on the overall gameplay, it seems weird to just be like, well,
Whatever,
you can
man.
pl- you want to play the Paladin Nova? Sure. Go ahead. We don't want to do it. And I think this gets to one of my comments, which is like, I feel like they suffered from this a little bit because in an effort to get community buy-in, they basically dug themselves a hole to make a shitty product. Because, it's like if you try to make everybody happy, you make nobody happy kind of thing. And I'd rather have them have a strong vision and design goal and end game that they want to see played, that they feel is that the competent is going to attract players to the D&D brand, rather than them tepidly trying to figure out, you know, oh, was this change? Did you like, no, you don't like that? Oh, okay. Let's just back that up and, you know, just do the 2014 one if you really want to. I mean, we'll still print this one and still invest time and energy into it, but if you don't have to play it, because we're not gonna be forced to make any
Well, there's
decisions.
still people playing 3.5. There's still people playing
Right.
advanced Dungeons and Dragons, right?
Yeah,
It's not compatible per se with the modern rules, but there's still people playing it.
yeah. But
Right.
imagine if they said fourth edition, and they're imagine if the fourth edition they're like, we've got this great new envisionment for Dungeons and Dragons and how it can be played and be very equitable and all that. Oh, but you're pushing back. Well, we're just going to make it so you can smash your 3.5 characters into fourth edition. Are you happy now?
Well, I mean,
Like,
realistically, I think the real the real weird part is them saying like, "Oh, you can still play the 2014 fifth edition." There was nothing that was ever going to stop anyone that wanted to do that, anyways. Like they would
Mhm.
just keep
Right.
playing 2014 fifth edition. So saying this isn't a new edition, but it has different rules, is a weird thing
I agree.
because
It's
it's like,
confusing
is it
at the
new
least.
or is it new or not? Like, is this the
mhm.
next generation of the game or not? And apparently they decided no.
It
Um,
feels like we're just trying to make 5th edition better. It's not as full of change. I don't know why they don't wanna go 5.5 other than it's annoying. I I
but
I I I
but
don't
they're
know.
really not even making the commitment to say it's better. They're saying it's different than other fifth edition. They're not saying it's better. They're just saying it's different, which is weird. Because like that's why editions happen, is because
Mhm,
like you can play like you said, you can play Advanced Dungeons and Dragons because it's a different game than fifth edition.
mhm.
It's not better or worse, but they're saying, well, this is better fifth edition. Well, then why isn't it sixth edition, or why isn't it one D&D? Well, because you can still play fifth edition, but it
I
just
think it all goes back to OGLs, if we're being honest, and I don't think they'll ever be fully honest with us. I think it goes back to OGL stuff.
I think it goes
Mhm.
back to OGL stuff, and I think it goes back to this inherent fear that they're going to do what they did in 3.5 and fourth edition. I think there is this inherent fear that they're going to lose part of it. They're going to make someone else be the next. They're going to split their market with somebody else again.
Maybe.
Yeah, and I think we can talk about the Black Flag playtest here in a moment, but I guess for me, as a consumer of Dungeons and Dragons, I mean, as a person who doesn't get a lot of exposure from like a top level influencer, and I'm not talking with the D&D staff on any base, not even I don't even talk with them in Twitter. Like they don't respond to me. I haven't actually
Have you
talked to them or
tried?
anything. No. I don't like Twitter. Twitter's stupid.
It
Uh
is.
yeah, take that, Elon. But the idea is that it, it feels like as a consumer looking in, I don't understand what the last 3 months that has really accomplished in terms of like all the money they put into PR, all the money they put into game design, all the the events, the hype, the all this stuff. I just don't get what it was for. If the end result was just going to be them, oh, we're going to release the same thing. We're going to include some optional errata.
Yeah, how do you spend that much money on a PR campaign using a product code name?
And
Like,
and end up with a worse outcome than if you would have just done nothing at all. Like if they would have just done
Right.
nothing and just basically said through future unearthed arcanas that we're going to slowly make changes
These
to the
updates.
existing game to
yeah,
address these concerns from the
because
community, they would have had a better outcome. And they would have
some of
said,
the
And
"Go
they could
ahead."
have just continued to put out. They could have just put it out like Planescape and Spelljammer and
Mhm.
not
no,
Dark Sun.
Spelljammer sucked. Sorry, Spelljammer. I didn't buy it, but Spelljammer sucked.
I did, and it was weak. I remember how last week I said, "Don't fuck me on this Planescape business."
I know,
Did
I know, I
did you
know.
guys see what they were there was like,
More
they're gonna
more
put a sto
content than the original Planescape. More content.
Uh,
No,
The book is bigger, more
the
pages,
I
more
doubt it.
content.
93
the original
pages?
original book, maybe, but there was also like supplemental books that came out for Planescape that really
Mhm.
fleshed it out. Um, I
Yeah, I
don't
don't
know.
think you're gonna get those.
It sounds like the exact same formula as Spelljammer, which is disconcerting in a sense.
Well, it
One
gives
thing,
you a little primer, it gives you a little adventure, and it gives you a GM screen, I think is what they
yes,
did. And then like and I mean, admittedly, I don't remember the exact page count of the original Planescape book, but I just remember
I just know what I read. I don't,
that
you know.
that I just have a feeling that if they treat it like they did with Spelljammer, and what's funny is that with Spelljammer, and I still go back to this, they had free rules. Since they were going to revise the rules for the space combat and it's not present anywhere else, they could have just fucking copy and pasted. Oh, we added 8 pages. Oops. You know?
well, so two things. One, the funny thing about it, that, like we talked about this when we talked about Spelljammer before, just me and you. But the weird thing is like there seems to be a real fear of of introducing new rules in a supplement in this generation of the game. Like
Mhm.
before, like when Spelljammer originally came out and AD&D, they're like, "Oh, you need rules for space combat? Yeah, just jam that shit in there. Just make something up and jam it in there." And now it's like, "Oh, we don't want to make the game too complicated by adding these rules."
Mhm.
So that's kind of weird. The second thing I would say is we love Twitter and we would like you to comment on our Twitter page, regardless of what Mike just said. We do have a Twitter and please go to our
You could email us or reach us on
Twitter.
Facebook, or you could even comment on this YouTube video, which would probably do us better than Twitter because Twitter. But to Brent's point, we are happy to talk to you however you want to communicate with us. So pessimism aside, please just give us a digital hug if you can.
Indeed.
So I guess that before we wrap up on the fifth edition rules and move to Black Flag, I did notice that at least from Daniel's perspective, he had mentioned that he had asked about the monk, the class that relied on his in his world Asian stereotypes, and so they're changing some of the classes and everything to be kind of more DEI permissive or passive DEI a little bit more and cultural sensitivity and all that kind of stuff. Um, non-European representation is, I believe, the direct quote that Daniel was able to get out of Jeremy Crawford. And so, in terms of like fundamental gameplay and everything like that, I wonder if there is a thing that in order for them to address some of their own stereotypes in the game, would they need to basically break the game down and then rebuild it? Because instead of like having the monk that they've had traditionally, that it seems to be based on martial arts movies and fantasy and all that kind of stuff, to bring kind of like a spiritual aesthetic, right? Because that's kind of the class, right? As a warrior aesthetic or something like that. Um, but that's not how it's presented, because obviously Asian religions and stuff aren't the only ones that have had monks. It's just that if you looked at a friar or a monk in Europe,
They're not a kung fu monk.
they're not a kung fu monk, is exactly right. So
I mean, I mean that's the thing. You would definitely need to rework that class, like
mhm.
because it is based on a stereotype. I mean, it is based on a Shaolin monk, essentially, is what the monk class is based
Well,
off
they're no
of.
longer calling it key. It's
Spirit
spirit
points.
Right.
spirit points. Yeah, that's
Mhm.
well. I joke that it's totally different, but we know that it's really not. It's simply just using an English word in
But
place of a non-English word.
yeah, but it's interesting because it like fundamentally, I think that like there's two ways that you can kind of build D&D, and at least in my perspective, there's obviously probably more that I could go, aha, you're probably right. But I feel like you could either build base classes that are generic and universal that could be applied to any types of settings, and then basically provide those base classes with setting specific feeling, right? So you could take an aesthetic, and then if you wanted to have that aesthetic from a far east tradition, then you could make them into a Shaolin monk. Or if you wanted to have them be, a different tradition, you could base it on a different world thing. And I think that the way that D&D has always kind of been is that it's been it's basically taken and created a culture, a world, a living environment for these classes to exist in, and then applied the class based on, real world stereotype. And I'm just kind of curious, do you guys feel that, you kind of find yourself in a hard place? Because I mean, some people may perceive those as being racially insensitive or racist or something like that, but that may not have been the intent or anything along those lines.
Oh, it definitely wasn't the intent. But here's the real question about the monk. Why does it exist? Like, why isn't there a hand-to-hand combat specialty in either the cleric or the fighter? They made it so you could play a kung fu monk. That's exactly why they play it. They didn't
Well,
make
yeah,
it.
no, you're right.
Yeah, they didn't make it so you could play a fighter who's a boxer. They made it so you could play a kung fu monk. So, realistically, if they would like to make it more less that, they should probably just do away with the monk class and integrate hand-to-hand combat into a cleric if you want to play a fighting monk, or a fighter subclass if you want to play something like a boxer or a wrestler
Or
Or
a
even
martial artist.
or a
yeah, a
martial
martial
artist.
artist, somebody
Yeah.
like what we would consider today to be an MMA fighter. I mean, most not to take this too far, but I mean, most military associations throughout the world provide some level of martial arts training, some of which are Eastern martial arts, some of which are Western martial arts. Um, I agree. I don't know how the fighter doesn't have a subclass that's just a weaponless fighter.
Yeah.
I
There's
I think it's because nobody that grew up playing AD&D wants to deal with grappling and overbearing and pummeling because that those tables still give me nightmares 30 years later.
but I mean the thing is, like I said, if the idea is that you don't want that stereotype to follow that class, what do you do to eliminate that? Well, the whole reason the class exists is because
Mhm.
of
How
kung fu
how is it
movies.
not a how is it not a subclass of cleric in the first place?
Because
Well,
If
because
they all had some quasi-religious
because a
background,
cleric is specifically a Eastern
servant of a
stereotype.
god,
It's a specifically an Eastern, or yeah, an
Western.
Western.
Western stereotype. It's specifically a Western stereotype. It's specifically
Yeah.
the knight, not a knight, but
So
a war cleric. It's
maybe the whole concept
healer.
of the class was inadvertently racist when they created it, and they've just never gotten away from it.
Well, but that's my question, is how do you separate these stereotypes from the ideas of the class without losing the class identity, right? Because I mean, it's okay. I mean, I don't feel like any game should like pursue racist agendas or anything like that, but I feel like, in some of these types of deals it becomes a really challenging act because I mean, again, in terms of setting, these monks were a class that were specific to an Asian themed parts of the world or whatnot, and aren't limited to those. Obviously, I think I've played in groups that have had tieflings and other races that have joined in these monistic traditions. So it's not like, oh, you have to be an Asian person playing this. Obviously, they have just borrowed from an Asian style and tradition, and basically said, oh, this is how we want it perceived in our game. But it's like to kind of divorce that. I wonder, like, because as you said, how do you divorce all these classes from this kind of like your Eurocentric
It's
worldview
it's. I
of the
mean,
classes?
that's the problem with the monk specifically, and some of the other class. I mean, even with wizard, which is a little different, but I'll get to that point in a minute. But like, that is the core concept of the class is kung fu monk. Like,
Mhm.
that is the core idea, and you can't separate that unless you rework the whole class. You couldn't even call it a monk at that point because that's the point.
That's
um
why I was saying aesthetic.
like,
Like
that would be
aesthetic
like
warrior.
that would be like we want to redo wizards so they're not Gandalf. What do you do?
What, you watch Big Trouble in Little China, I guess, and
Oh, there we go. Well, okay, so yeah, no, you're right. Like, you can, like,
Mhm.
you're right. You can do that. You can make a wizard that way. So it is a little bit more flexible because there is more to the core concept than just Gandalf, but Gandalf is still in it. Whereas there wasn't
Mhm.
that much thought in the monk class, I don't think.
Maybe, or maybe, and that's what it's interesting. I'd be curious to see how they rework the classes to make them not so culturally dependent on something that exists, and that you can kind of form them like clay into what you feel the output should be, but give you a set of base rules that are not trying to be stereotypical.
You would have to. Here's what I would do, and I'm not a game designer, but I played a lot of games. I would say you rename the monk pugilist. You remove anything that is in reference to any sort of like. You just make it basic unarmed combat. Like you don't talk about kicking or staff fighting or anything like that. You remove like their option like you move their options for just specific martial weapons. Like there's weird martial weapons that they only can use now.
Mhm,
Like it's a staff, and then the Asian inspired weapons are all like you have to remove all that. You could do something like that, but like you're stripping out the core concept of the class. And again, like I said earlier, in my opinion, really what they should do is there shouldn't be a monk, and there should be an unarmed fighter subclass in both the cleric
mhm.
and the fighter,
Yeah.
because then you would get your religious order. You would get your religious order unarmed combat guy, your way of the fist.
Mhm,
I'm religious, so I'm not going to hurt people by hitting them with a stick. And then you could get your fighter, who's like, I'm a pit fighter, boxer,
mhm.
cestus wearing gladiator sort of thing.
Yeah,
That would be my design choice.
and I think that I wonder if key or the idea of spiritual component to their martial arts is I don't know if I think that I've seen as many other cultures outside of the Eastern traditions where that's really been a thing. Like, I mean, because obviously, if you read comic books and stuff like that that are historical and everything, I mean, obviously, everyone was very, there's those kind of more like mundane, not crazy historical stuff. But then when you get into the historical thing, common concepts are like, their spiritual power, their key, they just have a greater container for natural energy or whatever, yin and yang.
Magic is what
That
it is.
it is,
Magic or psionics, like that
yeah.
was psionics would be like really honestly, all of the classes, like
Mhm,
sorcerer. Now that I think about it, sorcerer, any sort of psionicist class, fighter, and cleric should all have some sort of unarmed combat
okay.
monk character, because the thing is like all of those like, oh, you just trade your side points for your side
Mhm,
your side points because you're become your key points. Stuff like that. Like the monk is an absolute vestigial class at this point. I think. Like I
yeah.
think he. I mean, I don't. I say that, and I don't think they'll ever get rid of it because it's a core class in D&D now. But
Mhm.
I think that's a class that could definitely be cut if people didn't care so much about it.
Yeah. Well, I don't know. I think it's pretty low on the number of players. I mean, kind of probably right there around with druids, maybe. I've never seemed to have a problem with it, but obviously, I don't know if it's the most popular class out there.
I don't have a problem with it but if racial sensitivity is the idea, like
Mhm,
the core concept of the class is racially insensitive because it does speak to the one thing. Like there isn't really much else. Like even in I'm reminded of there's a R.A. Salvador book called it's a series of books called the Claris Quintet Quintet.
yeah.
And there's a monk character in that, and she's very sort of European nobility, but
Mhm,
like they talk about her doing like crescent kick of the moon and leaping mantis palm strike and stuff like that, and it's like it's so ingrained in that concept, like it would be very
mhm,
hard to get away
yeah.
from it.
Yep. Well, and it's tough too, especially if you look at cinema exported from Hong Kong regarding action films and all that kind of stuff, and you try to capture that into a class, you naturally lean that way, right? Just because I think that, and I could be wrong, but I feel like there was definitely a difference between those types of action movies and the type of Western fantasy action movies that you were getting with Conan the Barbarian and
There
and stuff like
definitely
that.
is.
Yeah.
There definitely was, but I think you could do that. Like if somebody wanted to play a kung fu monk, you could do that as a
Mhm.
cleric monk. Like they could make things to make that possible.
Yeah.
Um, but
So
it's just not been. I don't know whatever inspired anybody to put the monk in there. Frankly, it's a weird, it's a weird choice for a high fantasy game, in my opinion.
wasn't
Someone in
the
the
monk?
'70s saw a Bruce Lee movie and wanted to play that character in their Dungeons& and Dragon campaign.
That's
I
true.
I I I may be wrong, but I
Well, I mean, no,
don't think
that
I'm far off.
no, that has to be it. It just seems to be. I don't know. It's just kind of funny to me that it's stuck around. I guess it's funny to me that it's stuck around so long and it's current.
Yeah. So, I mean, it looks like I just did a quick search and it seems like the Dungeons and Dragons monk appeared in 1975. So, um, so a long time ago is what the
And
I'm
deal
telling you,
is.
man, it's Bruce Lee.
100%. That's what it is. It's all those kung fu movies that started to come over, like,
Mhm.
and they wrote a class. So yeah, I mean, it's the whole concept of the class is. I mean, it's not that creative for one, and for two, it's pretty specific. Like it's pretty specific as to what they expect you to do with
Yeah.
it.
It's almost
Mhm.
surprising that we ever had a pit fighter character, like, in the fight like a fighter subclass is pit
I
fighter?
In
Or
3.5, there was there was a class. It wasn't a class. It was like a prestige thing you could do that was a
okay.
savage grappler or something like that, and like it was all about wrestling. Like he
Mhm.
was a wrestler, pit fighter type thing. So yes, there has been, but not that
Yeah,
frequently.
is it just because unarmed combat sucks compared to magic combat and these great big
Well,
heavy weapon combat, like, nobody knows how to like, should I get 6 punches in a round if they're only doing 3 damage as opposed to your 1 thrust with a sword because I can throw them so fast?
well, I think that the problem is that different editions have handled hand-to-hand combat very poorly, and I don't think it's
Oh,
ever
yeah.
had
No, it's
a
been horrible.
great. I don't think it's ever had like a great golden era of the hand-to-hand or unarmed combat fighter. There have been some like optional rules and stuff like that that I've seen that have been, when used perfectly with other rules, have been kind of min-max okay. But I've personally never seen a situation in which somebody was like, oh, if you add A plus B, you get, the super destroyer pugilist class. It's just, I think when people look at it, they just see how limiting it is because, I mean, first of all, I also think that magic items really didn't help them out. So like, oh, I think that there was a way in like one handbook, there was like the if you went the poor route, the that you basically could do an unarmed combat person.
No, they were broken in 3.5, if I remember right, just because their flurry of attacks you could do like twice. So you could do something like 6 attacks
But
around or
Well,
something like
didn't you
that.
have to get to, like, 7th or 8th level? Like, you
Uh,
had like,
I
they
think
were kinda crappy for the first 2 or
I
3.
think
mhm.
it was like fourth level.
Was it
Like it
4th?
wasn't too
Okay.
bad. Yeah, it was like the minute they became a real monk,
I
they were
remember
pretty badass.
playing one
Yeah.
and doing, like, 5 points of damage to everybody else's 12.
And in fifth edition, they're not too bad either.
I don't think they're terrible. I mean, obviously, a friend of ours plays a monk, and he always seemed to do just fine with it. So, I mean, either we're just that terrible at creating characters, or he's just that much better at it.
Yeah,
One of the two.
the monk that I played with you in that one game, he was fine. He
Yeah.
wasn't. I mean, he wasn't built to be a kung fu monk at all. He was built to be a shadow monk, which is like least optimal way to play one, which is about par for how I make D&D characters. So so that's
What does this
fine.
character not do well? I want mine to do that.
Well, he could. Mine was all about. I don't know. He was an assassin slash thief, kind of like the character that I'm playing now. But anyway, so
How have you not made a Goliath cat burglar?
I hate Goliaths, bastards. Uh, so that's how. But like, you can do other things with them, but that's not the goal of a monk.
Sure.
So, uh,
So, okay. Well, I think at this point, the one D&D summit, I mean, if we were to summarize like what happened, is it really seems like D&D, the people at WotC felt that they were doing a positive thing by being more inclusive of the community members in terms of demoing products directly to them to seek direct feedback from these individuals. What they instead found was that they opened up the floodgates to have a different type of conversation. And I think that's probably for the best because, I mean, if they say if their true goal was to listen, then they should start by listening to these people that livelihood that they upended just with a few random decisions, that they felt wouldn't have any impact. But what it also revealed was that maybe the current state of the game is a little bit confusing. I don't know if it seems like they have definitely had some ideas around diversity, inclusion, and all those kind of things, and those are taking priority. And I think that's totally fine. but I it's just been confusing as to what they desire the end goal of the game to be, because right now it seems like they're just designing by committee, and I mean, I don't think that the fifth edition is going to be benefited by whatever process we've done with this one D&D thing. So, do you guys have any other comments before we move on to the Black Flag play test? And
I
now, what can
yeah,
Kobold Press do?
let's move one quick thing. I think that there's some good things. I think,
Mhm,
we didn't touch on, some of there's like 500 new monsters coming in the monster manual, and a lot of them are supposedly higher challenge ratings,
mhm,
to because combat doesn't scale well for the monsters.
mhm,
And it is still at its core, unfortunately, a combat game. That's still my opinion.
mhm,
Um, so hopefully some of the stuff they're doing makes sense. Hopefully some of the stuff they're doing makes people feel that it's more inclusive, where in places potentially it wasn't. Um, what the end result will be, until we get that, supposedly that next thing is dumping like 6 classes.
mhm.
So, it's not it's I don't know why they go 2 2 2 and then all of a sudden 6.
I think they just
Um,
want to pull the band-aid off and say that they're done with the entire thing. I think they're tired of it as
that could
well.
be.
I think well, now that they've said it's just going to be fifth edition,
Yeah,
there's no
sure.
reason to prolong this until they make another big
Okay,
announcement.
that's fair.
The new not new edition forever, D&D forever
What happens when they revise
fireworks.
this revision? What do they call that revision?
They'll call it sixth edition now.
The double revise, the double
They'll-
secret probation
no, they'll call it sixth
revision.
edition now. Is what they'll do. They're going to go back to the drawing board on this OGL thing, and they're going to figure out how they can put a sixth edition together without pissing everybody off. Um,
They just don't
that's what's
seem
going to
that
happen.
together, Brent. They just don't seem that together. That's all
That's
I
the
can say.
plan. That's on a whiteboard somewhere. I guarantee
Okay.
it.
Somebody
It's a,
has that on there
it's
circled. How to do
it's
this right.
it's on somebody's Kanban board somewhere. When it moved from one place back, went backwards.
It's currently in a closet on the 6th floor.
It's definitely a plan there, I think, because
Yeah,
because that's why they're calling it fifth edition, is because they've decided that they need to do a new edition somehow. So,
just
is
not
my
today.
opinion. Just not today.
So, okay, so then let's talk about Black Flag and the core fantasy role playing. I don't Did they have a name for it come out yet? I don't think I've seen
No,
it.
It's still
no.
just Project Black Flag,
Yeah.
right? It's still Project
Universal
Black Flag.
universal
So
rules.
so what's interesting is that I think because we've been talking a lot about one D and D and how people thought that that would transition D&D away from its fifth edition self, I kind of feel like on some level this actually hurts the I feel like this actually hurts Cobalt Press's approach to fifth edition, because I mean, at least in my opinion, if it just to kind of as a recap, Project Flag is an attempt by Cobalt Press to preserve fifth edition in its current form, but improve it in ways that they felt mechanically weren't as exciting as fifth edition was. But now that we have a situation where Wizards of the Coast are saying that they're going to support fifth edition kind of until further notice, I mean, where do you guys think that that puts Project
Uh,
Black Flag?
I think the word you're looking for is it's Kobold Press's revision of the 5th edition rules.
I,
S-
that's probably what it's going to
I
be.
I think it's going to help because I think it's going to be different. And
Some of the stuff's kind of exciting.
one thing that stands out to me that I think, like, there's one sentence in this that stands out to me is how the game is going to be different is you are ready to let go of PC alignment. We're discarding alignment as a core element of character creation.
Mhm.
Like, that is such a
Has
div-
anybody really, 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 really followed alignment in a long time?
I don't think so, but it's still a core. Like, you still have spells like detect evil and detect good
That's true.
and stuff like that. So it's a core piece of the game. And I think the decision to get away from that shows a desire. It's not D&D now. It's
Mhm.
a separate game now. That is a big commitment, and it seems like such a small thing, but it's such a philosophical difference in
Yeah.
how the games are going to be.
Yeah.
Because I think that the reason I was kind of I'm kind of wondering what the outcome is going to be, because I think to them, they basically said, "Oh God, this is our Paizo moment. If we really get this right." and D&D takes off on its own tangent and kind of leaves 5th edition behind, we can really stake a claim on 5th edition and create a rule set that has allowed Paizo to get that, kind of epic fantasy market share using, a recognized brand. Kind of, you know what I'm saying? Like they take the 3.5 to Pathfinder route and then they could have their Kobold Press version of that same thing. But I don't think that that can happen now. I think it's going to be different, but I don't think they'll be able to attract as many people from it because people are still going to play 5th edition from Wizards, and that's going to be still the supported game set. So, what do
I
you guys
think
think of that?
it kind of depends on how many people Wizard pisses off before now and Black
That's
Flag is
true.
out. Because right now, I still think there's a portion of the community who, if this was released tomorrow, they would be like, "Yep, this is what I'm playing now," because it's not Watsy's baby.
Mhm.
And
And
it's close enough to D&D to where I can take all my shit that I currently have, I can put it into this rule set, and I can play my world and not have to ever give Watsy another dime of my money.
Mhm.
So no, do I think it'll be the big Pathfinder split, like we're now the second biggest or first biggest, like when Pathfinder surpassed D&D for a while? Nah, that's probably not going to happen anymore.
Mhm.
But I think it could make a big bite, especially if Watsy continues to do stuff that seems just out of touch with the people that play their game.
Mhm.
yeah,
Jeff, what do you think?
I Brett and I were at one of our friendly local gaming stores here a few weeks ago, and they actually had they had Kobold Press product on the shelf. And we're not a huge, big metropolitan area with hundreds of thousands of people. Um, and I was impressed. They had some depth of Kobold Press stuff. It's well respected and widely distributed, and I think a lot of people really like their product.
Mhm.
Um, I th- it feels to me like they are trying to create something that they think is better, cooler. I mean, I got to tell you, they had me at Luck, which isn't going to be the final name, replacing Inspiration.
Mhm.
Inspiration getting me another roll with my broken dice that's going to roll another 5 doesn't help me. Me being able to spend 2 luck points or whatever they're going to call them, to improve a roll that was so close at a critical moment feels like it's putting the player in control a little bit of
Mhm.
stuff and removing some of the randomness. And yes, I get that the randomness is part of what makes it cool, but there are other times where you just need a little bit of help.
Mhm.
And if I'm supposed to be this heroic character, all of written fiction, all of movies and television, right? The hero at the end when he's getting beaten down finds that untapped reserve of resolve that allows him to, suddenly turn, and push back. Like it gives you
Mhm.
that kind of feeling, and I like their approach. I don't know how successful it's going to be, but I will tell you
Mhm.
this: as a group, when Project Black Flag gets an official name and comes out, I would like to try it
Mhm.
Okay.
as in our group.
Sure.
So
Well,
I mean, to me, that I'm willing to vote with some dollars. I I think I might buy the book. I kind of like. It's not that different. It's different. Is it
okay.
better? I guess we'll see.
And it might actually be that different by the end of it. Like
Well, it
they're
could
what
Mhm.
be sure.
because what they're saying about marshals, like martial characters in the direction they're going with like martial characters, like
Mhm.
that's a big
It's a
that's
big
a
change.
that's a big change.
Mhm.
The deciding that we want marshals to basically have their own. They're not spells, but combat maneuvers that are kind of like spells. Like
Mhm.
that's a big thing.
Sometimes playing a fighter does not feel all that engaging.
No,
I
it does
run to the
not.
front in front of everyone.
Yeah.
I pull up my shield.
Well, like I said, I have a lot of hit points. I have a high AC. I'm gonna stand here and try and get it to pay attention to me while I swing once a turn. Maybe
Mhm.
I hit it, maybe I don't. That might not even matter. And hope that like the monk or the rogue or the caster manages to kill it.
Mhm.
Like, and that seems to happen sometimes in D&D, and that's not always fun.
Well, especially when you get into that just trading dice, especially at low levels. You know, I hate DMing for you know, a group, and all of a sudden we find ourselves where there's a person who doesn't really have any special abilities, especially at low level, and all they
Mhm,
can do is just trade with that person.
mhm.
And there's not, at least in fifth edition, you know, there are situations that you really can't improve much. I mean, you can make it more dynamic and try to get into like grappling and unarmed and try to do that, but that could be just as detrimental to a low level character as helpful.
And most of the time it is.
so so you know, I mean, just them going, okay, I swing, whiff. Okay, what swings back at you? Whiff. Okay, I swing, whiff. I swing back, whiff. You know, that is that's
We
really
miss a
not.
lot. That's this is what I'm getting from our combined talking. We don't hit as often as maybe we should.
Well, that was the whole experience with my deep gnome character when we did Fandelver. Is that was what he did. He had a
Mhm.
high AC, he had high hit points, and he would whiff a bunch, but he would manage to be hard enough for the monster to just like tr- to focus on him, or and he'd
And
try
then
to get in the
consume all of our
way.
heals after
Yeah,
every
and
encounter.
well, we didn't have a healer in that game either. And
That's
then he
because
would
we're planners.
and he'd try to get in the way, like that was his whole thing. And like D&D has a kind of thing for that, but
Mhm.
I
Sure.
don't think that's always the funnest way to play.
Yeah. So I mean, so in essence, I mean, it sounds like you guys are still optimistic at least about what Black Flag can do, but maybe at the end of the day, it's not going to splash as big as it could have if D&D would have taken and veered off course a little bit farther. Is that kind of what you
I think
think,
that
or?
I mean, I think that's fair.
I
I
th-
still appreciate that they're taking a big swing.
I think
Mhm.
they have the ability to take a bite. I just don't think it'll be as big of a bite as it could have been if. And again, it kind of depends if WotC continues to
Eh,
drunkenly stumble its way
yeah, do you know what
through.
else is funny? I read some of the comments. Like, I think people are starving for a company to take the consumer seriously, and I think, you know, I think there's companies doing that, and it just doesn't seem like WotC's one of them. Like your comment that you just made, Brent. You know, WotC says they want our feedback, and they take it, and they're applying it somehow, but I I don't know if they really do, and the stuff that they tell us feels more like this 10,000-foot level, you know, view down. It feels like I'm back in my corporate job, right? And
Mhm.
being shouted down to from the mountaintop instead of being involved in the process. Like Cobalt Press gives me the
Yeah.
feeling that I'm involved in the process if I submit feedback. And
Mhm.
I can't actually prove that they're going to listen to me any more than Watsy would, but it
Well,
feels like it. And
well, I
that's a
mean,
difference.
yeah, and I mean, and the bottom line is, even if you look at the like Creators Summit that they did, like it just comes across as disingenuous, right? Like it comes across like, well, we're going to talk about this. Well, we have
Mhm.
questions about this, this, and this. Well, we're going to talk about this, and you need to be quiet. Because, like they said, like some of the creators said, like they were pissed when they came back from lunch and like these questions had been asked, and it's like that's just disingenuous because they're your audience.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Like they're they're your customer. They buy your product, and if they have a concern, you should, I don't know, you should you should lie to them and kiss their butt a little bit. I mean, it's a joke, but I mean, like you just should pay attention to what they're saying. And I think Kobo Press does. Like Kobo Press
Mhm.
seems to have, but I think Kobo Press has more of an idea of a game that they want to put out too. Like you said, they seem to have a vision.
Sure.
Yeah. Well, and I think having a vision and asking for community feedback to make sure that it's balanced is different than basically saying, "Okay, guys, how can we make this better?" and then getting a million voices that tell you relatively different things and being like, "Okay, we'll make all that happen." So
We're just glad handing and saying, hey, the product we put out, it's gonna be D&D. Like,
oh,
and
it,
that seems to be like sometimes what they're doing is they're like, it's gonna be D&D, and D, and that's all that really fucking matters. It's gonna be D&D, and it's gonna be D&D all the way through because we say it's D&D.
And you'll like it.
yeah. And yeah, and so I mean, it aside from the stuff that they're doing, it just feels like it's weird to see a corporation as big as Wizards of the Coast not have their ability to purchase an answer to this question, but it feels like they're asking questions and they don't really have a strong, I don't know, maybe it's just leadership, maybe it's game direction, maybe there's just maybe there's a piece missing from like the puzzle, that there's not a person that is like, this is how the game is going to go. You're all going to get on board, and this is what we're going to make, and it's going to be fan fucking tastic, right? I wonder if that person just doesn't exist because I think Kyle Brink, the current director of the game, he's only like a few months into it, and I think he basically came into it. You know, the trailer house was on fire, so I don't know if he's really had a
Do you
chance.
think there's really people in production of the new game that have played and are fans of Dungeons and Dragons? That would be my question. Because I don't feel like there is sometimes.
Yeah, I mean, it's like, I mean, I want to say there is, but maybe, and this is tricky. Maybe they're playing a version of Dungeons and Dragons that's not aligned with a version of our Dungeons and Dragons.
Well, that's true. I mean, that was always the story of
Mhm.
I know I talk about Games Workshop a lot, but there's a story from Games Workshop once that I always remember where there was this giant disconnect in the community. The Necron army used to have this rule where if you beat 50% of them, they just lost. Like if 50% of their units were gone, they just phased off the field and lost, right?
Yeah.
And like, so somebody asked them about that. They're like, when is this going to be fixed? And the game developer said, why do you use that rule? Like, we don't use it when we play. And he's like, then why is it in the book?
Yeah, yeah. If it was that bad, why
like,
didn't somebody just
yeah. And they're like, well, we don't use that. We don't use that rule. Like, and I remember that that was a literal conversation that this guy had. And like, and you're right. Maybe they are just playing a different game than we are and
Well, and every once in a
don't
while,
understand.
I think that leaks through in some of Jeremy Crawford's comments and how he says, "Well, in my own table, we do this," and it's like you just kind of go, "Bitch, your table is the table. That's the rules. Like, why is your table different than our table?"
Right. Why does your table do that and it's not the table? Yeah. Why do you not implement that in the game? That sounds genius. Why are we not all doing that? Oh yeah,
Yeah,
because your fucking books doesn't say to do that.
yeah, and I feel, and sometimes he has, and maybe he has takes that aren't necessarily better than the current existing rules, and so that's where it becomes very confusing. So, I think that there's a lot that like I think in 20 years when Wizards of the Coast has gone bankrupt because they pissed everybody off for the last time, and they just drive their IP into the ground. I mean, worst case scenario, right? They'll do a case study for how this does and how every company should not do this.
No, what'll happen is if that starts to happen, they'll just sell it back to TSR. And
If you want to see something get
Does
burned to the
TSR
ground,
still exist in any way?
yes, it does.
it does, but
Really?
in a
Tactical
weird
simulations
way.
are still around.
Yeah, it's still around. They were going to put out they were going to put out that game that was, well, I don't want to talk about it. They were going to put out that game that
Okay, don't.
a lot of people didn't like some of the stuff in it.
Because wasn't it Star Frontiers? Wasn't that the name of the game?
Yeah, something like that.
Yeah, because like and it was Gygax's nephew that was working at
Yes.
TSR or the new
Yes,
TSR.
Yes.
Isn't it NU TSR? Isn't that what they called it?
Something like that, yeah.
oh, something like that. Yeah, okay, I remember that vaguely. Because so it's technically not TSR, but it's the spiritual love child of TSR.
Well,
It's the direct descendant.
I think they hold all they hold all the old TSR holdings. They just
I thought Wizards bought all of that.
TS just doesn't have there just isn't anything left. TSR bought Dungeons and Dragons specifically because I don't think does TSR own Gamma World?
No idea.
I haven't looked, and I
That's
think that
okay.
I think if
We
we
don't.
wanted to get into it, we could talk about it later. But I mean, what Brent is so gently alluding to is that the folks at TSR tried to release a game called Star Frontiers, and if we want to get into something that is insensitive and all that, then
I'd rather not,
that
if I'm
was
being
kind of
honest.
the thing, and it's a little weird, but we'll get out of it. So, do you guys? I mean, at we are close to our normal finishing time. I can either give you guys a quick update on Golden Sky Stories, or we could wrap it real quick. Which would you prefer?
Why don't we told the people you were going to give
You
them your opinion. So
you,
why
you
don't we
made a
do it? Brent and
promise
I
to
will
you made a
refrain.
promise. You made a promise to the people.
Exactly.
Okay, well, since this is a promise to the people, and this is, and what's funny is that we've talked about all these like really hardcore, like anxiety inducing things for some people, I'm sure at Wizards, as to how the game is performing and the way the community reacted to them. But let's do a little bit of a review of Golden Sky Stories. So, Golden Sky Stories is it's heartwarming role playing, and I know, and I know that you guys probably have seen video games and stuff like this where it's, it's very much a game that is, like, I want to say low key, focused on like, good feels, like, like stuff like Stardew Valley, where there's not a lot going on and you have a lot of control, and the problems that you encounter are relatively small by comparison to, like, I'm playing Baldur's Gate 3. There is a demigod trying to destroy reality, something like that. So the problems are much smaller and everything like that. And so when I say heartwarming, I also say like the artwork in this is very adorable seeming. It's very childlike and kid focused and everything along those lines. So I was looking at this game because a friend of mine had suggested it as a way for him to have kind of a non-combat type game with some of his friends. And so reading it over and learning a little bit about it, this game was actually originally designed by Ryo Kamina, or sorry, Kamiya in 2006 in Japan. And it wasn't until 2013 that this was actually translated over to English. If you guys have never heard of your Ryo Kamiya, then you probably never heard of their other titles that they produced, most notably Maid RPG, where it's basically a maid simulation using maid tropes. I don't think that's really made it to our gaming table just yet. And then there's also one that's called Necronica, which is a game of undead girl dolls fighting against the necromancer and its minions. So I admit that neither of those games may have passed our table, but just in case anybody's wondering who Ryo Kamiya is, that
Oh,
those are some other
okay.
games that they've produced, and I believe those are actually available in English. So I think that the other adjectives that you can use to describe Golden Sky Stories is that, it's cutesy type of game. um so just the kind of the premise is that the characters that the people are creating are known as henge, which are kind of animal spiritual creatures. They can either be an animal, they can be a hybrid form where they have ears, tails, other types of things as part of a transformation, or they can go full human and all that kind of stuff. The setting is that it takes place in a town that's typically created by the narrator, who's going to have a lot of control over how this town is. But the idea is very much that the town is a what are those things? It's kind of like it's non-metropolitan, and kind of very much reminds me of how our gameplay in Vason is that in order to kind of get to where the Vason are, you have to leave the big city and all of those kinds of things, because that's still that borderline between the spiritual and natural versus the cityscapes and all those kinds of things. And so the idea being is that, you are going to be the Tenge. You're typically it's going to be, I mean, they suggest that the ages for these Tenge are between 8 and 18. So the stories are, kind of to a simpler time, a much younger crowd. I wouldn't necessarily say that it eliminates the fact that you couldn't have mature stories in this, but rather than, like we said with D&D, its premises is that the problems that you're solving are more going to be about connections and all those kind of things that you have with the townspeople. So a townsperson or a person is going to have a problem, and you're going to try to solve that problem over a series of acts. During each of those acts, you're going to get resources that determine what you can and can't do in terms of like the special abilities that you have as Henge to help you solve the problem and all that kind of stuff. And it's very generous with how you give away some of the different dreams and other types of resources that you have to spend. Now, um, in terms of like actually would I play this game, is I think that in its current iteration, it might be too cute for me. Um, you know, I mean, I think that any table is going to play the game how they want to, and I think the framework of the game could be very much kind of a heavier role playing, less combat focused game. But you just have to kind of make it the game that you'd want to play it. And I'm thinking that with a rule light, heavy narration approach, you could still have a lot of fun. I mean, it's got enough rules for you to have fun. Just the setting itself may be not my normal setting. So, nonviolent resolution, heartwarming, cute anime. What are those things called? They're like animal ear girls or something like that. Slice of life gaming.
Yeah, it's a slice of life. I mean, in looking at the website, it feels a little Studio Ghibli esque,
Hmm. Yeah,
you know. So, like,
it's
I can see that. I don't know if it's a game that I want to play, like, but sounds
It,
interesting.
it has a place. I would say it
Yeah,
definitely has a place. I don't necessarily think, I mean, to look at me, this may surprise people, but I don't necessarily know if it's the type of game for me. But it does have it definitely has a place.
I
mm.
don't think it has a Cthulhu crossover, Brent.
And 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 I think if it did, it would be probably inappropriate. That's what I'm going to say about that.
Yeah, sorry, I wasn't trying to go there. I was just trying to
I'm just
play
saying.
up your love of Cthulhu.
I'm just saying. Tentacles and bunny girls is
Oh
probably
yeah, that's
not
probably awful. Yeah,
the not the direction that this game wants to go in at all.
Well, at least this game. I mean, I couldn't tell you what happens in that Necronica game.
I
Or
was gonna say Necromancer Dolls sounds more oof. That sounds
sounds
hmm,
maybe different, but I think
very
that
different.
I think in terms of like, could you play this game? Yeah, I mean, it could create some very interesting stories
Sure,
because I think that the one thing that you guys, I think we enjoy out of role playing is that we like to divorce ourselves more from reality and kind of get ourselves in more fantastical environments and settings, whereas this is very much more brought back to the present and then kind of giving you just something that's so much more controllable. Like, it go ahead, Brett, you have something.
Yeah, one thing I would say in kind of this slice of life kind of thing is I did listen to a Tales of the Loop game once, which is
Hmm.
for those of you who don't know, it's a kids on bikes RPG where you play kids. And it is a little bit more sci-fi, like horror oriented. There's usually like it is a bit darker. It is more like Stranger Things or stuff like that, kind of Goonies, stuff like that. But like I
Hmm.
do remember one of the more powerful scenes in the podcast that I listened to was just the tough kid, it's an archetype in the game, interacting with his shitty mother. And I remember that like that, and it was such a mundane thing, but it was very well done.
Hmm.
And so like games like that definitely have a place. Like you could definitely play. I would probably lean more towards like if I was going to do something game like that, it would probably be something more like Tales from the Loop or Kids on the Bikes.
Hmm.
Because it is less cutesy and it is a bit more grounded in reality. But I definitely think there is a place for this sort of game. There's definitely people that
Hmm.
that'll want to play it.
oh yeah,
It's just
there's
not for
definitely
me.
an audience out there.
Yeah,
I
it's just not. It doesn't sound like it's for me. So
Hey, and you know what? Just because it's cute anime, animal girls and stuff like that, doesn't mean you can't change it over to cute anime animal boys too, and play as a boy.
oh
Um,
sure, that part doesn't bother us. I don't think it's just
no,
I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding.
no. I just it's just more again the affect of the setting. I'm
Mhm.
also not a big anime watcher, so that's the other thing is I don't watch a lot of anime. Um,
For shame.
again, I watch a lot of horror movies, so for me, it's kind of this game is kind of the antithesis of the game that Brent would run or playing probably. Like,
Mhm.
I would probably play it if someone who was like, "Oh, we're running a one shot of this game." I would probably be like, "We're what?" Sure. And then I would be kind of confused the entire time, but I would try it.
Well, but I mean, it is just nonviolent problem solving, and I admit that
sure.
that could be a little tricky, especially for our group. Which, when I give everybody hammers, everybody finds every nail of the situation. Um,
Well,
it's
if
with a
all you
hammer.
give us is a hammer, everything looks like a nail. So
Yeah. So,
Yeah, and I'm always going to be the type of person that sometimes I make a hammer and punch the
well,
situation in the face with
you can use a wrench as a hammer. I just want you to know.
it.
although they did mention in the game that if you did find a situation in which combat wasn't avoidable, they did give you conflict resolution, mechanics to deal with
Aggr-
combat. But I think it was more supposed to be kind of like
something
that.
aggressively heartfelt.
yeah, it was supposed to be that like, oh, you got into a fight and then you separate, but now you have to come back together and figure out how to resolve your friendship.
Now
Like
we're
that could be,
friends. Yeah, sure.
I mean,
Deal with my heartfelt aggression.
I mean, there are things like that in there, and so, but the one of the most interesting things about reading the book was that I very much felt like they gave examples of play, just because, and I was like, after reading the rules and kind of getting the word soup downloaded, I was like, how does this really play? Like, how would you really play this game? And I should have looked for an actual play, but they had a fairly long session that they basically wrote out between um, a narrator and two players and everything like that. And it just so reminded me of like how Japanese people would talk and everything like that. It was so cool, like just to see like that translated and be like, oh, this is exactly how they do. And it immediately brought my understanding of the game to like where it needed to be. Um, but at the same time, I was like, well, I think
Well,
this
that
makes it
that is a
even more.
perspective that you have that Brent and you lived in Japan.
Mhm.
You you have a unique appreciation of the culture, even if Brent and I have an appreciation of the culture, we've never been there.
Yeah.
So it is harder for us to understand some of that stuff, and it does feel like a very Japanese RPG.
Oh, it is. It's very much a Japanese RPG. They try to eschew violence. They really want you to solve it these other ways, and they reward you for these creative solutions. So, I
Yeah,
mean,
and
it is.
I like that. I
Yeah.
there's enough combat RPGs out there. We don't need more combat RPG.
Right,
Yeah.
and one thing that I do think is neat about the that I can see about the game is getting your players to think of alternative ways to solve situations to combat. Like, and I
Mhm.
think that's a positive thing. Is if you do play it, like you can kind of get the players maybe to focus on that, which I think is
Mhm.
neat.
Yeah,
So,
like you can't just beat somebody up and tell them to make friends. Like that just isn't how that would work.
right.
It's like you're going to be friends with them. Pop right in the face. Um, I mean, maybe that's how it works. I don't know. So, final score. I mean, would I play this? I think I'm in the same boat as Brent. If somebody else wanted to run it and I was seeing it as like kind of a one shot deal, I'd probably give it a try just to further it. But I don't think this is going to go on my go play pile, at least not yet. I'm not seeing a compelling reason to jump on it.
No,
But
it would take a heck of a recommendation by somebody that I trusted, or a really successful one shot if
yeah,
somebody ever wanted
Mhm.
to run one.
yeah. And so maybe what I'll do is one of these days I'll make you guys do a cute anime Japanese story, and I can already see Brent's face getting squished in sourness as he's like
It's
trying to
it's
imagine.
it's kind of
Like,
hard to imagine, but sure.
I steal the pie out of the window.
I am the guy that stabbed. I am the only person that killed someone in the Vaesen game, so keep that in mind.
with Brent, it's like one of those. It was something that I just remember. It was like this really cute thing, and then like one of the characters was just this absolute murder hobo, and everyone's just like, "Oh, what were those?"
Oh, you're thinking of VeggieTales, or not? No, not VeggieTales. You're
Yeah,
thinking of
Veggie Tales.
Happy
Wow.
Tree. You're thinking of Happy Tree Friends. That's what
That's
you're
it.
thinking of.
Happy Tree Friends, where they're all like
Yeah.
those cute little bunnies, and they're like,
And then they use chainsaws and shit on each other. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. That's exactly what I was thinking of, Brent. It's been many
Yep.
years since I've even thought about Happy Tree Friends. I don't know if they.
Happy Tree Friends is my thing for a while. I used to send it to people.
You're a dark, dark man, Brent.
I am. I
But
have a
but
lot of problems. Let's just say that.
but hopefully, and you know what, it'll be interesting because the friend that I have that's going to run this, he can give me his perspective as to how he feels the gameplay goes, especially since it kind of also shies away from having big meta plots and kind of more focusing on the simple problems and solutions and everything like that. It'll be interesting to see if he can kind of have a grand story told between the stories that he sets up and everything like that. I'll be interested to see how it goes. um yeah, so that's Golden Sky Stories, and that's my impression of it. And maybe one of these days what I'll do is I'll also do a review of Necronica, and we can see what undead girl dolls and the apocalypse are like.
Undead girl dolls in the apocalypse. That sounds interesting. I will say that. It does sound like something.
It sounds problematic.
Sounds like something.
Well, I mean, and so there was I did want to read this line to you, Brent, because I think you might appreciate it. And this is from TV Tropes, is that it says, while the bulk of the game mechanics are concerned with patchwork zombie construction and body horror and the combat between these undead girls, it also contains detailed and extensive madness system, which relies on and produces complex emotional attachment between player characters, and even with the occasional sentient foes. A central mechanic to the game is that the only way for the doll to stay stable and sane is to rely on and manage these intense and often contradictory and irreconcilable emotional attachment to her sister undead dolls. That sounds intense.
It does sound intense.
It
It,
does.
it
It
does
does.
sound, that is the word that I would use. Man, that sounds intense.
A lot
Um,
going on there. I'm not going to lie.
yeah, there's a lot to unpack. It sounds like in that game.
Yeah. So thank you, TV Tropes, for actually diving into Necronica, and it's also sorry, it's Necronica, the long sequel. I don't know what it's the sequel to though.
No idea.
So, all right, tangent completed. Golden Sky Stories, play it if you'd like it. If you do play it or have played it, let us know what you think. Maybe you have a positive thing to say about it. Maybe we'll try it at our table. I'll of course be following up my friend and see what his ultimate thoughts are on the game, and we can go ahead and call that this week's episode. Um, Jeff, do you want to remind people that we can be reached on social media, including Twitter?
Yes, including Twitter. You can find us on Twitter, YouTube, and Facebook at Rollwise or rollwiseguys@gmail.com.
Yeah.
And as always, everybody, thank you for joining us. We hope you've enjoyed your time with us and listening to us today. Be safe out there, and as always, roll wise and roll well.